Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the On Meaningful Work podcast. In this episode, I speak with Tony Corrales. Tony has an incredible story. He's originally from England and originally a punk rock musician. Yes, he headlined a punk rock band that toured the world, but since then, since moving to Australia, Tony has spent the last 10 years working between online and offline marketing for not-for-profit organizations, along with consulting work in digital strategy and operations. In 2020, he launched the ethical fashion label Noskin, along with the Producing with Purpose podcast, which is now evolving into PWP Studios, where he and his team provide consulting services and, coming soon, online education to make your good business a great business. Now, before we begin, I have to say that the thing I fear the most while recording a podcast to not happen actually happened. The SD card got full and it stopped recording midway through. Now, Tony was gracious enough to backtrack and re-record, but there may be some continuity issues. So my apologies for that. That being said, without further ado, here is Tony Corrales. Tony, thanks so much for joining me and welcome to the On Meaningful Work podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great to do it in person.
Yeah. So we first met at your Creative Mornings talk a couple of weeks ago, I think just like me and everyone else in the room, I was really blown away by your story and kind of what you've done, and not so much what you've done, but just the way you go about doing it, that I thought I've got to have you on. So.
Yeah, excellent. I'm glad it went down well. I was a little bit nervous for that one, so it obviously went well enough if you've asked me to come and speak with you now. So
yeah. So I'll just put this over.
Yeah, of course.
Just so that we know.
Yeah, perfect.
So maybe to start off with, where are you from, Tony? Where'd you grow up?
That shouldn't be a hard question, should it? It's not a hard question. I was born in Spain and I lived there until I was 4. And then I moved to the south coast of England. My family relocated to the south coast of England, hence why I sound a lot more English than I do Spanish, but walk around with a name like Antonio Corrales.
Cool name.
Yeah, cool name, but really awkward when people ask you to speak Spanish and you can't. I lived there and then I grew up on the south coast of England in a place called Portsmouth. Yeah.
Okay.
I moved to London in my mid-20s.
Sure. Are your parents Spanish or were they?
My dad is like kind of 3/4 Spanish, if that's a thing. My mum's half English, half Dutch. It's a real mixed bag, but such is the case in Europe as well. And there's of course there's the Irish grandma as well. There's got to be the Irish grandma.
Yeah, the Irish Catholic grandma.
Oh, very much. Yeah. No, well, not as much anymore, but yeah, definitely, definitely can put that on when she wants to.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I've had one of those. My grandma was I'm from India, and my grandma was from the Portuguese part of India.
Oh wow,
which is Goa. And so very strict Catholic upbringing. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent.
So you went to school in the south of England there? Or?
Yeah, I did. So that for anyone who would call me out on it, who listens from where I'm from as well, there's a very small town called Fareham, which is like sandwiched in between two cities, and I went to school there. It's a very pleasant area. It's a little bit more run down these days when I go back and visit, but maybe it's just because you remember things when you're a kid as being a lot more bright and sunshine in the summers and things. But it's pretty standard little pocket of England.
Yeah, wow. What were you like in school? Did you enjoy school?
Interesting. I was pretty good in school. I was definitely a kind of aim to please kind of kid. I wasn't a naughty kid. I was pretty good. Pretty academic, quite enjoyed school. Not a popular kid, but kind of got my way through, and it was a good solid 7 out of 10 experience.
Okay. That's usually when I ask people to rate something, I'd say from 1 to 10, but you're not allowed to say 7.
Well, I think that's because 7 is such a kind of like neither here nor there answer.
Yeah,
and I suppose I'm thinking of like very early years of school that was like that. As I got more into 15, 16, that was, and I know we'll talk about that. That was when I kind of found my calling in more alternative music scenes and punk scenes and things like that. That's when it sort of shifted a bit. But even through that, I was always very, I actually enjoy, even now, and more so now, as I think a lot of people in their 30s would say, I love learning.
Yeah.
You know, but I've always been a huge reader. I've always loved books and getting into arts and things like that. So I got to do a lot of that in school, which was nice. So it was a decent experience.
And when you were school age, were there any books that stood out to you that you think back now and think?
I guess it depends in what sort of age we're talking. I think ones then that became of note, and probably again in that sort of 14 to 16 thing, I definitely would push myself. Yeah, so I think it's probably three. One, and I probably, looking back, didn't fully understand them or comprehend them that well. But one would have been The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, which was obviously, that's pretty heavy to be reading at that age. I definitely wasn't fully comprehending it, but it was an insight into that kind of reading.
Did you have to hide that from your Irish grandmother?
No, she was always pretty good. Like
Okay,
because the other book I was going to say actually came from a suggestion from her, and it was one of her favorite books, and now probably my favorite book of all time is Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yeah.
So she got me again reading that when I'm like 15. So the philosophical side of that I've since read every couple of years, and I really feel like I read it maybe in COVID during lockdown. I read it again, and I think that was the time, since I've become a lot more interested in philosophy as well, that I finally really understood that book, or at least probably still didn't fully. I think you could read that book 30 times and not fully understand it, but definitely put a lot more of the pieces together.
That's definitely one I've been meaning to revisit, because I read it when I was 18.
Yeah.
It blew my mind, but I understood maybe 20% of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, it's and I think it does come from a place of like, probably especially in COVID and just before that and leading through it, I always kind of try and have a bit of a side thing of what I'll be learning at the time. Like I read a lot of business books, and I read a lot of motivational stuff and stuff that gets me in the zone to work, and I absorb myself into, fashion and environmental things as well. And then I'll try and have something, a bit of an aside. So like, I'll try and drill down into maybe some economics for a while, or into philosophy or something like that.
Yep.
And yeah, philosophy has been one that stuck with me. So then returning to that book, it made a lot more sense.
Yeah. Do you recall as a young person what particularly grabbed you about that book?
The funny thing is, and it's still a part that grabs me now, is the journey and the traveling.
Yeah.
So now I read it in this way. So I have a much better understanding of the philosophical side, where there's a whole discussion around the meaning of quality and things like that, the philosophy of quality. But if you take away, it's almost two books. There's one that's got the whole philosophical mindset and the whole investigation into that side. And then there's the whole side, which is this guy motorbiking around America. And that part of it was the part that grabbed me, because that still is, I've been lucky enough to travel around and tour around America in a van, but I'd still love to do it on a motorbike. So that part was always a real big grab for me as well. That was it. Like the sense of adventure was huge.
And how about the God Delusion? Like as a young person, how did that?
I think that's one I actually have been meaning to revisit, because realistically, I read that at 14, 15 to just be, I don't want to say just an angry teenager, but like, it was coming from that place of, it was almost to just give myself some sound bites to be a little bit that way. I mean, it very much aligns with I'm not a religious person, but it's just pretty much an each to their own thing. But at the time, it was when at that age, whatever you latch on to, at least for me at that time, I like to be quite abrasive about. So I feel like I was using that as like to fuel my arsenal of going back, and even in conversations with like my grandma or something, to go back and be like, yeah, but what about this and this? So yeah, I think I probably read that book at the time for the wrong reasons, and actually I did revisit it not long ago, and I was like, I can live without. I've got my own opinions on this. I don't really need to delve too much into Richard Dawkins' opinions on this.
Sure, yeah.
So,
and you mentioned a third. Was there a third?
The third, I'm trying to think. what it was called now, which is obviously kind of made. But I started reading a lot of Michael Moore as well, and that was and also getting more into his music. I can't think what the book was called, but I know it was around the whole time of Fahrenheit 9/11, him doing
Stupid
all of that
White
stuff.
Men, was that?
I think it was his one after that.
Okay,
I've totally blanked. It was there when I was thinking about it. It'll come back in like 10 minutes and I'll just shout it out for no reason. But that one was, I think that as well was just like an introduction into politics. And obviously I was living in the UK, but American politics it's very accessible in a way because there's so much literature on it. It's quite Hollywood literature around American politics.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas if you pick up a book about English politics, it feels like very heavy and a lot more inaccessible, especially when you're like probably 15, 16.
Yep.
And again, that was when I was listening to a lot of political punk music who would reference people like Michael Moore. So I was like, I need to know about that. And I mean, it's probably been the case, to be honest, for a lot of my life is I've known more about American politics than Australian or English politics.
Same here. Even like the recent election, I've been just following it non-stop, whereas I have no idea what's going on in Australian politics.
I know, it's right. It is just, and it is one of those things, the more you learn about it, the more you're absorbed in it, the more it's easier to follow and keep up with. And I think that's it, is because I started following American politics as a kid then, and, you know, I suppose through my early 20s as well, I stayed with that. So it's kind of like I'm on series 10 now or whatever. I'm not jumping in late in the game. So
and as a young person, what were your music influences? What were your parents listening to?
Yeah, it's an interest. So I definitely grew up a lot on English punk and mod music and things like that. Like bands like The Clash and The Jam, especially The Jam. That was like my dad's favorite band growing up.
Oh wow, okay.
And even then things like Paul Simon, Simon and Garfunkel, and that kind of round. But it was always a lot of, you know, musicians' music, or like, you know, instrument-based music and things like that as well. And then, I think it was definitely growing up in that realm. It's funny because I just think of The Jam pretty much as like my upbringing, and I've still got like my dad's Jam records now that I still have in my place, which is, I was talking to a friend about it because we were listening the other night. Just a couple of friends coming around, hanging out and playing board games and eating pizza or whatever.
Nice.
And it's like the one thing, you know, because they were just calling me out for being a hipster with my vinyl collection as they do.
It's a prerequisite to live in this area.
Exactly. Like what else are you going to do? But I was saying how it is nice that I could put on that music and be like, oh, this is, you know, music I grew up with. But I'm putting on this record that the exact same one that my dad used to put on. Probably when he was even younger than me, before I was born, he was putting this on with his friends around. Yeah. I'm like, that's really nice to have that, you know, that physical artifact of this, like this album that's gone through.
Yep.
So I think that's really cool. And that was what I grew up with, a lot of that. And then I suppose he was into punk music, but sort of like a bit more of the mod side of things as well. And then that opened the gate for me to then get more into punk music.
Sure. So the mod were bands like The Who and The Kinks?
A lot more of that, like very British kind of thing. And then I started getting into a bit more of the punk side of it, like The Clash and The Pistols, which my dad obviously grew up with as well. And then a lot of it as well then came in at the same time, was a lot of the American West Coast punk music that was coming in, like real pop punk bands like your Green Days and Blink-182. Like I loved that. I was, you know, skateboarding around.
They were really good.
Oh yeah. And like, but then like quickly got into, I suppose, more of the punk rock that influenced them as well, like bands like The Descendants and NoFX. So I'm starting to go into that tangent now, but
no, that's great.
And that was where that's where it starts to open up, and then you listen to all of their influences, and it's such a huge subculture that I got pretty like caught up in that, which was great.
Besides the music, though, what was it about that subculture that grabbed you? I can turn that back on if you like.
Oh no, it's fine. It was just pretty heavy. I think the subculture as well. It is a subculture for. It's funny because at the time as well, it was a subculture that was very much for the people who didn't fit in, and always will. Punk is always the counterculture, and I definitely felt like, you know, I had my group of friends at school and I had a pretty good time at school, but I certainly wasn't in like the popular. I wasn't the sports type and all that kind of thing. so yeah, like I mean, I started playing guitar when I was 13 when I got my dad's guitar handed down to me and things like that. Started playing the jam and that, and then got into that kind of music. So I think it's great because it's not like I found that genre of music and there were loads of other people, so it gave me a place to fit in. It just gave me a real confidence in not fitting in, which I think is a great thing. It's like, yeah, I don't fit in, and that's great. I don't want to. I want to, like, you know, I want to sit here on my lunch break, like with my headphones on, listening to NoFX, and you know, it was just so it's like you felt, felt a lot more home in that world, and just loved the music as well. You know, it just grabbed me, so that was cool.
Sure. Also, you know, one thing that grabbed me at your talk at Creative Mornings was how this punk rock ethos kind of got into your DNA somehow, and then that kind of influenced how you live your life in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it does hugely, and I think it's always funny to me in a way because I don't know, there are certain types of music that give you that kind of thing to follow in a way, or like that set of, let me call it guidelines, but that way of life. Like people who grew up in the 80s listening to metal like Metallica and Iron Maiden and stuff, and that was it. That was their whole thing. It was like, well, I know what to wear because I wear my cut-off sleeve denim jacket and grow my hair long, and I listen to Maiden. And it was similar with punk music as well, is it gave you like, you know, I wore what was in the punk scene and what was growing up with that. It's like, this was before skinny jeans were skinny jeans and everyone was wearing them. I would go to Camden in London, which is like the home of old school punk in London as well, and go to the little like side streets from the vintage stores and buy like the skinniest jeans you could find. So it's like you get into the whole culture of it. But then the thing with punk that I think it has that maybe even metal doesn't have is that the songs have then got a lot of the time an underlying message or point to them as well. So you take bands like, you know, you listen to something like Iron Maiden, a lot of it is quite fantastical and it talks about these crazy things. But I mean, I'm sure someone into metal would say you're missing the point. There's all this stuff as well. But for me, that was my perception. Whereas you listen to a band like The Clash, and this is in the 70s, talking about, you know, racism and inequality and things that are happening in London, or taking influence from sounds from around the world and bringing it in. There was a real message of unity and stuff. So it's like, it was actually like the progressive environment from the 70s onwards. And a lot of obviously anti-establishment, anti-authority, but it just opens you up to a whole new line of questioning, which was all of that. It was just this melting pot of not just taking things at face value and investigating things a bit deeper. That was, just a real, like, I wouldn't even say it really attracted me in. It's just once you open the door and you put your foot in and then you get sucked into it, then it's just this ongoing cycle of learning. And I guess that's it. It's like I did a lot of learning through punk music as well.
I'm not the biggest punk fan.
That's right.
But
it's an acquired taste.
But I am a huge music fan though, so I've definitely come across, you know, a lot of punk bands like The Clash and Ramones and so on, Patti Smith, you know, and there, I think in the early days as well, there was this sort of, you know, DIY ethic of punk where, you know, the big record labels didn't want to touch them, so they had to really get in there and do it themselves and put out their records themselves. And
it's a huge thing about it. And I mean, there's a whole question and discussion around ethos and punk rock between DIY and selling out major labels and everything as well. And I think that's it. It's like, looking back now, I mean, you know, it was a very Fareham, like I said, Fareham was a nice town to grow up in. That's it. It was okay. And you don't really, when you're a kid growing up as well, you don't really have perceptions or understandings of class and status and things like that in the same way that you do as you grow up. And I think, like, you realize that when it is like kind of you're in this working class background and things open that up to you as well. And it's just like that DIY ethic becomes a lot more inspiring because you see these people who can come up from, and in a lot of places as well, a lot of the bands came up from much rougher or impoverished areas than I would grow up in. So even when I felt like things were out of reach for me, or it was not something you could achieve coming from like a small town, I'd see all these guys who were doing it from like anywhere and everything, and doing it with a guitar that didn't have the right amount of strings, and they couldn't sing, but it didn't matter because it was
you only
about
needed 3 chords.
That's it. You needed 3 chords and a good message, and and a good attitude, or a bad attitude that works well. And that was it, and that was all you needed. So it was, for me, that was inspiring. And I've talked to other people and said there's a lot of also anger and misery in punk music as well, and I also liked other music that was a little bit more depressing or a little bit more downtrodden and stuff. And I'm like, if I grew up listening to hip hop where it was all about cash and girls and stuff like that, would that have been even more aspirational? Would I have been like a 25-year-old millionaire because I'd grown up with that, rather than thinking like, it's okay, I'll just be angry and live in a squat or in a van and just But I think it was, like that DIY attitude that you just need to grab what's around you and make it work. For me at the time, made everything feel possible, but also made me feel like I didn't need, materialistic things or superficial things. It was like, I was happy to just have a purpose. And then as I've grown up, like, that's never left me. I've definitely changed my attitude and views in other ways. But that underlying sense that as long as you've got a purpose pushing you forward, or you've got something to believe in, that's extremely powerful to keep. And that's the one thing that I've really retained from that scene. Yeah,
wow. So thinking back on your childhood, though, were there any experiences that you look back on and you think, okay, that really influenced who I am today?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it is like, it was getting into that. I mean, if we weren't having this conversation up until this point, and somebody just asked me that question out of the blue, and it's like, what experience? I would say it would be discovering like punk music and just becoming extremely. I guess I wasn't the most confident kid growing up, but then getting into that gave me a whole new realm of confidence. Like, it was very. And I think that's what it is. It's like, I was really confident in not fitting in, which is that's an extremely powerful thing to adapt to. Instead of like trying to change my personality to fit in or like gain confidence, it was like, nah, this is who I am, and I'm really confident in that. Take it or leave it. So that was pretty defining. And I mean, one of my childhood things that was massively shaping as well was, I guess it was 2002, so I've been like 14. And because I, like, as much as I loved, like, I got into hardcore punk, East Coast hardcore, all that kind of thing, but I loved Blink-182 because I was a kid of that era, and like you do. And they were going to come to the UK, and that was when Tom DeLonge hurt his back and couldn't come to the UK and tour, and I was devastated. Like, I'd just been looking forward to that, counting down the days for a long, long time. And my dad then kind of took me out of school and flew us to America from the UK and booked tickets to go and see them there because they cancelled their UK tour. Now, obviously, that's a massive, it's an amazing thing to get to do and come from a place where I was lucky enough to have that. But even retrospectively looking back as well, I realized like how that wasn't something that we could just afford to do. Like, that was, I know he would have been paying that off for a year after.
Wow, that's incredible.
And we went to that show, and then afterwards I got like my first guitar that was like my guitar, not one that was handed down. And I came back from that, it's like, I'm starting a band, that's all I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go and do that. And that was like the game changing moment. So on one hand, it's like, it was what a luxury thing to be able to do as a kid, to get like flown out to go on vacation to America and like go and see the show.
Where'd you see them in America?
I saw them in Florida.
Wow.
Okay. And it was so it was awesome, like so cool. And I mean, at the time I was obviously stoked to be going, and looking back now I'm like, it's just so grateful to have had that opportunity, because that was a real game changer. Like, it wasn't a game changing opportunity or like a life changing situation where something really bad happened and that made me come back with like this fire and grit. I was like, wow, I got to see I got to see exactly what I want to do. And I think that's why I then kind of fell in love with America as well.
Yeah.
Seeing that there, it's like, I want to be around here, like surrounded by the palm trees and the punk rock music. And that kind of set me up with the fire to move forward, I think.
Yeah. And just on America, like I've been there a couple of times, and yeah, I mean, people love to. It's a very, let's just say, complicated place, but you can't beat the optimism. Like once you're there,
it's a tough place. Like I was with an American friend of mine a couple of nights ago, and he grew up in Vegas, and he's got zero desire to ever go back there, which I can understand. And a couple of the guys I played in the band with have now moved to like America. One has now since left again. He was like, nope, didn't like that once I got there. And I know that would probably be, I have lived there for a little while, and it's a screwed up place right now. And there's opportunity, but there's also a massive lack of opportunity for a lot of people as well. It is, the gap between the wealth gap is huge, of course, but the opportunity gap is huge. And the rate of success to get that opportunity is also, there's very big discrepancies in that as well. But I think coming from being a kid and seeing that, and then having times where I'd then be out there and touring, like I guess every time I went there was because I'd achieved something, or like something good was coming. So it's definitely a rose-tinted view that I have of the place.
Same, yeah.
But yeah, it's still. So I think it's probably good. It's good that I don't move there permanently and figure that out, because it would probably ruin the illusion a bit. I like to keep it as a mysterious land of opportunity. So I'll leave it at that.
Can I ask about your dad?
Yeah.
What did he do for work?
So he worked, when I was growing up, he worked on ships, like as a waiter on ships. That was, and I think as well, like, I mean, my mum's absolutely amazing too. And she was just like mega supportive, especially because it was me and her at home a lot when I was growing up, because he would be away. Like it'd be like work 2 weeks on, 1 week home, work 3 weeks on, 1 week home, that kind of thing. So, 2 and 3 weeks, I guess, when you're a kid as well, feel like long periods of time. But then sometimes they probably don't. Sometimes they just feel like nothing because, you're out with friends and doing other stuff. So he was doing that. But he then, like, he's had a crazy kind of career progression of literally being like, I think, waiting tables on ferries that would go between England and France, and like living on there for stints, to then eventually being like.
And welcome back.
Yep. Cool.
All right. So for our listeners, we had a few SD card issues, shall we say?
Yeah, we got through it.
So where we left off, Tony, I think you were just finishing off talking about the influence. I asked about the influence that your dad had.
Yeah.
And how you look back on that. Could you, and you're talking about his career and how he was working in ships and so on. Could you finish that thought?
Sure. So I think I got to a point where I was saying he was, he started working as a waiter on ships, on ferries, away for a few weeks at a time, back for short stints, which was cool. So yeah, I think, and sorry for people listening if I'm repeating myself now. Can't remember exactly what I covered, but he then had a pretty successful career in his industry after that, like some really crazy jobs actually, and did really well. And it definitely came from a point of, I mean, he's a terrible procrastinator as well. And we do share that trait. I can be pretty bad for that, but I've sort of trained myself out of that a little bit. But yeah, he really kind of put in the time and effort and the hustle, and he always put a lot of, I mean, there was definitely pressure from him at times that was, you should be doing more. I should be telling you to stop rather than telling you to do something. But it was kind of good to have that, although it made us fall out quite a bit and have some issues. I definitely carry that with me now, and the work ethic. But it was a good balance, because then my mum was also someone who was just extremely supportive. And I think she had a lot of confidence in me that I would make the right decision or do the right thing at the right time. So she just sort of like had the door open for me to make my decisions on my terms. And then, with the trust that I'd know when to ramp it up a gear or when to do things the right way. And also that I'd find my way eventually. I think she had enough faith that I was a smart enough kid to find my way there, even if I took a few interesting turns on the way.
And speaking of interesting turns, like your mind was pretty made up on being a musician.
Yeah.
As we covered after you saw Blink-182.
Yeah.
How did your parents feel about that?
I think because my dad had had his time of trying it as well, he was very encouraging of it. And he always encouraged me massively with the music. I think my mum was encouraging of it because she knew that it was what I was really passionate about. I don't think she necessarily, I don't think it would have been her first choice if that's what I'm going to do, because she knew like the unpredictability about it. But yeah, she was very easygoing, and it was just supportive, like always immensely supportive of the fact that like I'd be bumming around working random part-time jobs and stuff. I mean, I did get very lucky that I actually spent some time when I left college and I'd done film and media. I got employed by the college as soon as I left to be like a teaching assistant for the film and media department, where I would do things like format SD cards and help them out.
Which come in handy.
Yeah.
You never know.
But yeah, I was like, helping students with their video editing projects and things like that, and, running the media suite and stuff. So, but that was great because it was also a job that it got my parents sort of off my back a bit, I suppose, because I was making a bit of money and working part-time hours. So that was great. At least I wasn't always, coming to them and being like, I need this and I need that. I was able to pay my way in life. But it was also great because I was on education hours, which meant I had summers off and half-term breaks that, you get paid pro rata. So we would then do a lot of our touring and stuff during those times. And that was awesome for me. It like meant that I was able to kind of retain a bit of a job. And the main thing was having a sort of semi-consistent job as well, that I didn't have to keep coming back and be like, right now I need to find another cafe to work in or another, bar to work at. I just had that job from 8:30 till 12:30 every day. And then the rest of the time was mine to go and try and make it in the punk scene. So no, that was a very fortunate turn of events as well.
And speaking of making it in the funk, in I was going to say the funk scene, but the punk scene.
Oh God, no. Yeah.
So how did you start to get the band going and start to really make a name for yourselves and start to make, I suppose, carve out a living that way? Yeah,
so I mean, it was very DIY, like we've talked about. DIY was the way. Remind me if I've said any of this on the previous bit, but we have recorded, but I don't. Yeah, okay, so that's all good. So a big thing we did to start off is, I think we just took matters into our own hands a lot, but it wasn't a conscious thing of, guys, we need to do it this way and do that. We just sort of instinctively did things because no one else, the music scene is brutal. Even if you're kids like 17 playing in bands and stuff, it's still, it's still brutal, and it is to this day even more so, I swear. But we just knew we had to do things to get there. So we started off and we had aspirations and we would just go towards those goals. And at the time we didn't think, because we're entrepreneurs who are hustling, it was just like, we want to do a thing, we will do a thing. And there was a venue in Portsmouth where we grew up, a 400 person capacity venue. And that for us, that was the goal at first. It was like, we couldn't imagine anything bigger than that. That was the venue. That was where all the bands we loved would come through and play. So it's like, well, how do we get a show there? Well, the best thing we can do to guarantee a show there is we'll hire the venue. We will put ourselves on the bill. We'll get a couple of friends bands who can sell a few tickets to open. And this is, this isn't an uncommon way to go about it. But then it was like, right, we need to now justify our place there and show this venue and show everyone who said that we couldn't play there that we're, more deserving of it. And we would go out and we'd be in the back of the car with a megaphone and a book of tickets. Because I remember back in the day, you'd get books of tickets and you had to tear them out and hand them out. No digital tickets. And, tickets would be like £5, $10, whatever. And we'd go out with a megaphone and stop and groups of people hanging out in the street, and we'd stop and be like, we'd have the music playing in the car as well and be like, come and see our band, it's £5 a ticket, and everyone would carry cash. And of course, it's game of numbers. 4 out of 5 groups of people would tell you to do one and keep driving. But 1 in 5 groups of people would be like, yeah, okay, we'll take a couple of tickets. And we'd just drive around day after day. I'd finish work at 12:30, we'd jump in the car and we'd go and do it. We'd walk up and down the high street and stop people. you know, it's basically like when people try and stop you and get you to donate to charity, but we were trying to sell tickets to the punk show.
Yeah, wow.
And to us at the time, that was just like,
That's what you do.
that's just what you do.
You didn't see yourselves as hustlers or...
Like, that's just how are we going to sell 300 tickets and not stand up there and look stupid, like playing a no one.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then we'd do other things, or we'd get, and we'd print or like photocopy posters and put them up everywhere. And that is a lot more of the DIY punk ethic. You know, that used to work. I don't know if that still would work, to be honest. I mean, you'd probably have to go around with a Square terminal to take card payments if you were going to do it. But
QR codes made a roaring comeback.
Yeah, exactly. So, but honestly, like, you know, if you live in a city like Melbourne and you're playing a show and you walked up and down Brunswick Street and you were like, hey, we play in a punk band that's like this, and this. Tickets are $10. Tap here and buy a ticket and it'll get emailed to you. Like, come and support the local music scene. You'd probably sell tickets quicker that way than you would a lot of other ways. Like, you know, some people would, again, tell you to keep moving, but some people would respect the hustle. They know what it's like.
Yeah. And I suppose when you were doing that, it was before, I wouldn't say before the internet, but definitely before social media and before things started to take off that way.
Yeah. And I mean, we were a band in the era of MySpace as well. Yeah. And I remember as well, we would spend hours upon hours going through MySpace. And you could just add people as a friend and you could send them a message. So we'd have a copy and paste message that was like about the band. We'd add the person as a friend. We would then send them a message that would have one thing like, hey, we looked at your profile and saw that you like this band and this band, because people would always say what bands they like in their profile. We think you'd love what we're doing, this, and this. And then they could go on the page and hear your music. And we would have the four of us in the band would sit there for hours every night, all on an individual like laptop or computer doing this, or taking turns whilst we're sitting there getting drunk and like hanging out and listening to music. But that was how we'd build up like a following of thousands of people and start conversations with people and all that kind of thing. And it wasn't like, let's sit here and hustle. That was just what we did, because also, what else are we going to do? All right, you might be someone sitting there playing Tony Hawk's on the PlayStation whilst it's happening, but that was just what we did night after night, like all the time. And if you worked on a business with that like intent, you'd make waves. Like, but we get caught up in, oh, it sounds like overtime, or that sounds like, is the payoff worth it? We just did it because we were kids and we wanted people to hear our music.
And during this time, did things then start to happen for you guys? Like,
it definitely built up a bit, and like we would have, you know, people would come to those shows, and we would make a big show of that as well, and we would have, you know, we would hire pyrotechnics and make a big deal out of things, and so that people would come and see it, and they'd be like, yeah, well, you stopped me in the street and you sold me a ticket. I mean, that was okay. Like, we had to make sure that we then, you know, when you've got them through the funnel, you've got to convert them at the end, and you've got to make it worth their while. You've got to over-deliver on the promise. And that was what we did. Again, it wasn't, I mean, that was intentional. We knew that, like, we've got them through the door. Now it's really our job to make them come back again. Like, increase the lifetime value of the customer.
There we go. That's a little less punk rock. But
yeah, exactly. But again, that's just, and it's funny because that is what you're doing. You are essentially making a sales funnel and converting people and over-delivering on your promise and getting lifetime value. You just don't know that that's what all of that stuff is. It's same principles apply. And then we found ourselves wanting to get onto bigger tours. That was the next step for us. And again, couldn't get in. I mean, we also weren't the best band. That's probably why we kept getting knocked back. But that didn't matter because we were confident in it. And then there were a couple of bands coming, and I think the very first band we did it for was the band Rancid. And for us, that was like, that is a tour we should be on. There's 1,000, 2,000 people at their show every night. They need to hear us opening. But we didn't get the gig because we weren't in that realm. We did eventually at one point then tour with them, which was cool. So we said, well, we'll go, and every night they play on their like 2-week UK tour, we'll go outside the show with acoustic guitars and we'll play our songs, and we'll play them to the line, because people would be lining outside for an hour to get into the show. So it's like, we'll start at the front of the line, we'll play 3 songs, we'll try and sell some CDs, tell people about the band, then we'll, you know, move 20 meters down the line and play to the next section. knowing as well that people would drive home after the show with their CD, and you've only got so many CDs in your car back then.
Yep.
You've just had a great time at the gig. You got your friends in the car. You drive in 45 minutes home. Yeah, chuck on. Let's see what this is like. And again, if you then have got a good product, the EP or the album was good, then people would be around. And then we'd hit those towns after, maybe like 2 months later on a tour, and go and play those places that we ran around, so that those people who saw you in line would then come to your show. And that was how we built up a following around the country.
Yeah, wow. And then while this was happening, how were the dynamics within the band?
Always good.
Yeah.
And it was the real thing. And like when we started touring more professionally and heavily, I suppose, and like we'd be doing 2 months in the US touring, living in a van all together. The amount of times people said to us, "You guys you're always together." And I found that really weird that people would say it, until I later was in another band where everybody would arrive at a venue. We all got on and it was fine. But it's like, all right, well, you've got to be on stage in 3 hours or back at the venue at 3 hours, and everyone would just walk off and go and do their own thing, go get dinner somewhere on their own. Maybe now and again it would be like, oh, I'm going to go to this place. Does someone want to come? But it's pretty lonely. It's quite isolating, especially because I was the newcomer to that band. But in my band is 2 months, like we'd just always be together. It's even like you'd be at a venue, because this was touring around the US at like a festival every day. And you've got a lot of free time as well. It's like, oh, I'm going to go to Walmart because I need to get some new socks, like something as stupid as that. And it's like, all right, one person would have to stand back and like man the merch table or whatever. But the other two guys like, yeah, I'll come for a cruise. We would just grab the skateboards, go over to Walmart. Like we were always together. After the show, if we were going for beers, always together. Like it was the whole point. We didn't care if we played to anyone. We didn't care. I mean, obviously we had to make money to get to the next place, but as long as we were just having fun, that was the main thing. And that's why we would sit there for hours adding people on MySpace. That's why we would get in the car and play outside, because it was that, or we were going to hang out together sitting at home playing PlayStation. So we might as well do something that we enjoy doing the most, and that was playing music. Yeah. But either way, we would have been hanging out together every night anyway.
Have you seen the Peter Jackson's documentary on the Beatles?
I haven't, no.
It's incredible. Highly recommend it. But one thing that really, I think, stands out is, even though the Beatles at that time were towards the end of their career as the Beatles, how much they just loved hanging out together, and how much they just loved playing music together. Like 90% of what they did was just fucking around, just playing songs that they loved.
And that was it for, like, we were friends first and a band second. So that was what we did. So it was, like I say, we were either going to play music or we were going to play PlayStation, and we preferred music. So we went and did that.
And so maybe fast forwarding then, how long did the band kind of stay together, and what kind of led to, I suppose, you wanting to do other things, or,
So the band stayed together for 7 years-ish, about that. I then got essentially poached into another band, which was a really challenging decision, and a decision that I made. I don't necessarily regret the decision. I think it was the right thing to do. And I then actually went back to my original band. So I went and did this stint with another band. It did not work out. I did not enjoy it, because we weren't friends first, music second. It was like a job. And they were more successful. There was more opportunity, but I just didn't respond well to that. I'd come from such an amazing dynamic that to then be taken out of that, I was like, oh, is this what it can be like for other people? Is this why people kept saying to us it was weird that we were just got on so well? And the other guys were great. So I got on with them fine. It just wasn't the same. And I didn't love the music as much. It wasn't my thing. So I didn't act brilliantly in that. I could have managed the situation better as well. In the end, parted ways with that band, which is the diplomatic way of saying I was kicked out. And then that was then a big shift, because now I had no band. At this point as well, I was 25, and which now seems extremely young, but I was like, man, I'm 25 and I actually have no idea what I'm going to do now. The interesting thing was I'd also seen that this band was a lot more successful and had a lot more of the kind of professionalism of like they had the right manager, PR agents, publicists, like decent record label. They had all the stuff that we didn't have as a DIY punk band, and it was still like a real grind. And I still looked at it and thought, even there in that situation, it's very, very unlikely this is going to turn into anything that I can do for a long time and make a living from.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a stark realization. Probably a good thing in a way, because, you know, it did make me reconsider some other stuff. And that was when I then moved to London and managed to get a job working in a not-for-profit, which was PETA, the animal rights organisation, on the marketing team in there. Zero qualification to do it. I just wanted to work for them because I was really active in the animal rights scene. And I didn't get the job, but then the person who did get the job pulled out because they paid not very well, and you know, they didn't want the job. But you have to be vegan to work there, and I had been since I was like 18 or whatever. And I think they just didn't really have a choice. It was me or no one. So I got the job, and I went in there, and that was like the start of them working in marketing and not-for-profits and things like that. I met what is my now wife working there as well. Wow. So it was a real like shift of, and I mean, so lots and lots of good stuff came from it. Like it opened up the door to the next chapter of my life, totally. But the time itself was pretty miserable because I'd just come out of, you know, when one door closes kind of thing, yes, another one opens, but sometimes it takes a year for the next one to open. Yeah. And for that time in between, you're just sat in a dark room.
So for you though, had you made up your mind that your life as a professional musician had come to a close, or were you?
I think so. Like, I think that was the time for me. There was about a year period when I first took that job that was pretty grim times. Like, still had fun. I was living in London, but I wouldn't listen to punk music. I got just fully into jazz. That was all I was into. I couldn't listen. Like, listening to punk music was like looking at your ex-girlfriend's Instagram, you know. It was just like, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? It's just, it's too raw. But then after a year or so passed, I hit up the guys from my original band and was like, let's do another album, let's do another tour. And I think it was because I then had a whole lot to write about, and for me that's always been a thing. Like, I still play music with some guys now. It's very much a like hobby thing because I just like to write music. That's like, I may not be a touring musician, but I'll always be a songwriter. So I've always got that. So we did another album, went and did another tour of the US, which we were lucky to get back onto, considering, you know, we'd taken some time away. And that was then like, I didn't want to finish my career, so to speak, on a sour note. So I went back and wrote like the album that I'm most proud of, went and did the tour that I had the most fun on, because no longer it was like, this time it was appreciating that it was just me and my friends going to have fun. So that was like the best part. And then I guess that was kind of healing in a sense, because I got to finish my thing with my band, with my songs, like doing our thing. And then I was like, all right, now I'm ready for the next chapter fully. And that was when me and my partner, who's, like I say, is now my wife, went traveling and then came to Australia.
Wow.
So.
And this was after working for
PETA, yeah.
And then, so what did your career look like when you came to Australia?
So very luckily, because my wife was working, I'd actually stopped working for PETA at that point and gone to the British Red Cross and worked there for a while. It's fine, it was a job. She got the opportunity. They said, if you're going traveling, you're going to Australia, you can actually work for PETA Australia when you get there if you want, and we'll sponsor you. So it was like, cool, let's move to the other side of the world. As much as I'd had that nice closure on my music career, it still sucked. Like, I didn't want to be there anymore. And I think not being able to tour and have that outlet, I wanted to travel instead. I still wanted the adventure. And then, I just wanted like a real clean, fresh start, I guess. So we found ourselves here. She was incredibly supportive of that as well and was happy to start fresh. So I came here. Funnily, the first job, we got here and we'd been traveling like flat broke, staying in an Airbnb. Like, we're like, we can afford this for like 5 nights. I need a job. That's fine. I like the pressure. But the first job I got, like, there was plenty of stuff I was applying for. But the job I was able to get within like 48 hours was hustling charity subscriptions on the street.
Oh wow, that's
So-
got to be the toughest.
Yeah.
That's the toughest gig. Whenever I see those people out there, I'm like, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing when you're trying to sell, I can sell gig tickets, but it's real hard to sell, it's
Yeah.
hard to sell a monthly subscription to Save the Children or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I literally did that for like 2 weeks. Because I'd also come from like working at the British Red Cross. I'd actually become fairly like, more established in what I was doing there. I was copywriting acquisition campaigns that were going out to like a couple of million people across the UK. So when I came and applied for this, I'm like, yeah, go for it. Like, but I literally did it for like 2 weeks until I then had gone through the process and got another job here working for Save the Children, where I was working as a like marketing manager kind of thing. Did that, and then just got a bit drained in the not-for-profit space because, again, it was actually at that time that I started to get the concept, or like the whole hustle thing and entrepreneurship. I'd never thought that, I don't think I'd said the word entrepreneur like more than once in my life until I was, 28 or something, 29. And then I started seeing that content on YouTube and things like Gary V and all that kind of thing. I was like, oh, this is kind of like the mindset I've always had. But now I realize this is a whole thing, because that just wasn't my world. I was a creative. I was an artist. I was a musician. I was working in charity. It was all very much that side. I'm like, oh, no, I'm a hustler. I'm an entrepreneur. This is what I do.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? As a musician, it was like you always saw yourself as creative, but as a musician, you selling tickets on the road was just something you did.
Yeah.
Rather than you thinking of yourself as an entrepreneur, which is exactly what you were doing. You were being an entrepreneur.
Oh, exactly. Like all the things we did, I'm like, man, it's, I did start a business. I was managing the band. And by the end of it, we're also selling, by the time we're on tour, like, a couple of $1,000s a day in merch and t-shirts and things like that. So we're organizing the logistics of at what venues the merch needs to come into, what our forecasting is for how much we'll sell, like what our margins are, how much money we need for the tour and the budgets.
Yeah.
Because that was just like, if we don't do that, how do we do anything? But again, I didn't realize I was running a business and I didn't even really ever think of it that way. I was like, no, I play in a band, but I've got to do some admin.
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, it's, so it's a very weird thing to then see that stuff and be like, oh, now there's a name for it. Now there's stuff I can learn about. And then I just found myself in the not-for-profit space feeling a little bit like it's not the most hustled environment. It's quite chill. It's a little bit like, working in government can be a bit slow-paced. Working in charity can be a bit slow-paced.
Yeah, sure.
Massive value in doing it. Obviously, it's a hugely important and quite fulfilling place to work. But then I started getting really like into, I want to work in tech and I want to hustle and I would do that. So then I went and worked for a digital agency, doing kind of like operations, project management, digital strategy, that kind of stuff.
And just with that, how did you get that job? Was it based on, because your experience in those areas were quite limited, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I really don't know. Well, I do know. So I applied for a job at an agency. Looked amazing. I was like, man, this looks like Google. There's, there's beanbags everywhere, man. And breakfast when you arrive, and like coffee machines and stuff. It was, it was in Cremorne. It was very techy. Really felt like that. Good clients. And I found the website. I was like, I want to work there. That is what I want. I can go there and I can hustle and be an entrepreneur and like learn about all this stuff. I was like, I'm going to apply. And then my theory here was I'll apply. And when I get rejected, I'll say, what would you have wanted me to have that I don't have to get into an interview? But I got an interview and I was like, cool, even better. I can say, what in the interview did I not have that you wanted? And I'd been doing I had been doing a lot of project management, because I was managing marketing appeals and, all that kind of stuff. So but I didn't know what a project manager in a tech agency really was. And they asked me questions that were technical, like, what's an API and what's it? I'm like,
what's a Kanban board?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know these things. And I remember them asking me a question and saying, if a client asked you what's better, PHP or .NET, what would you say? And obviously I was clueless. I'd never heard of either of those things. I had zero idea. I said, I'd actually, I'd actually have a sip of my water and pretend that it went down the wrong way and have a coughing fit and excuse myself from the room. I would then go outside and quickly Google what's better, PHP or .NET, and then I'd come in and I'd give them the answer from the first thing I found on Google.
Yeah, brilliant.
And they were like, yeah, this guy can bullshit his way through a meeting. He'll be fine. And that was it, because that is account management, project management is about, it's about switching it on and, you know, being able to sit down and have a conversation and pull your way through. And that was the biggest thing, going back to what we talked about a while ago. The biggest thing I learned from my dad was the art of, not the art of bullshitting, but like the art of thinking on your feet and blagging your way in. Every job he had was always 2 steps further than he should have been. And it's been exactly the same for me. Yep. I had no right to get that job in Peter doing marketing. I had 0 qualification. I had, even when I went to the Red Cross, I like put myself in way into the deep end. This job in tech was way into the deep end. I'm good at interviews and I'm good at treading water and not drowning, I guess is like the thing. Because then when I get the job, I spent a year, like I didn't leave that office for a year until I was kind of like the head project manager for the agency within a few years, and like, you know, making a lot of the decisions and doing a lot of stuff there, because once I get the opportunity, I'm going to run with it. So yeah, I guess that's a skill set. It's hustling. Like it's just hustling my way through.
And then, so you're making, you know, great progress in this agency. Like when did you start to think that there's something in me that needs to come out? I need to do my own thing. And
I think that was when as well, like, I mean, I'd always managed to get these jobs. And saying that, when I first worked at Peter and I was 25 and I was having a bit of a bad time after the punk band stuff, I was a pretty useless employee. I kind of got my interview, got my foot in the door, and I didn't over deliver. So every day I showed up there and I thought, they're going to fire me today. Like and I hated that feeling. But only when I kind of got this like hustle and grind in the tech space in the agency was when I was like, I'm not losing this. Like I will be the best thing here. But then it got to a point where I was working huge days, and I was making a massive difference, and I knew I was good at it because I put in the work, and it all made sense to me, like that whole space and tech stuff, like, and the account management, project management, just chatting to people and getting through. I was like, this is like an interview that I can turn it on for every day. That's my whole job. I'm like, I was made to do this. But then I found, man, like, it doesn't matter how hard I work. The only thing I can do next is go and get a better job that pays a little bit more and does much of the same. And I'll keep doing that process, and that's good. But I was like, I want to know that if I'm going to sit here from 7 a.m. till 9 o'clock at night, making sure that I'm the best at this, I want a bigger payout. So I decided to start my own business. And the thing was then is I've learned so much since that point too. And I thought, well, for me, starting a vegan fashion label was just like a thing I wanted to do. I was like, it's great. It doesn't really matter what the business is. I just need to start. I need to, I just need to have a go at that and figure it out. Turns out it's a pretty hard business to start.
But just this feeling of, no matter what it is, I have to start. Where did that feeling come from? Was it just...
I think it was like I was devoting a lot of my life to work, and I enjoyed it, but it was like, I think it's the same as being in a band. And this is the thing, right? I realized, and I'm talking like a year into this venture of this business, it's like, man, I have to show up every day and like get paid next to nothing for it, work extremely hard to try and get people to hear more and more about this brand. Sometimes like it costs you money to even show up and do it. 90% of people, it's going to fail. 5% of people are going to scrape by. A couple of percent of people will do okay. And like 1 or 2% of people who start this will make a lot of money. So it's the same as being in a band. Like it's exactly the same concept. But in a way that was like, I didn't want to do it with music anymore. And, that's fine. But I realized that actually I'd started the same kind of thing. So I think that was it, is I wanted to work on something that I was passionate about so that I could sit there like I used to every night, or I could go out and hustle it on the street or in shops or whatever it was, do all of those things, that didn't feel like work, and I wasn't going, oh, I work 12 hours today, like it seems unfair that I'm only paid this much. It's like, no, the hours, the money, it's all irrelevant now. It's back to like the purpose-based hustle. And that was where
playing your guitar to the people in line.
Yeah, playing the guitar to people in line, or in this case, trying to like show people that, you know, non-leather footwear can be just as good. Like I had a reason behind doing it. It was something that I was passionate about. It's also something that I just enjoy. I enjoy the whole culture and the scene of it. You know, fashion and punk music go hand in hand.
For sure,
So yeah, it was the same. It's like, it doesn't feel like I work. I mean, I work hard on this business, and it's very unrewarding sometimes, and sometimes it's really rewarding. But I never feel like I'm working, and that was how it used to be playing music.
Yeah. What's the name of your business?
It's called Noskin.
Noskin. Yeah. And so maybe thinking about your business now, is there a favorite failure? And when I say favorite failure, in that it's something that you learned the most from, and that.
Yeah, I think it's favorite failure is, it's fact, because in a way I don't feel like there's been any really distinct failure. I mean, there's definitely been lots, but I think favorite wrong judgment to a favorite learning is, I was adamant in the first year, we need more products. We've got to do more things. We need more products. Because the more choice there is when somebody comes to our website or somebody comes to our store, the more chance they'll buy something, because there's variation. And, you know, if you went into a supermarket and there was, you know, one loaf of bread and one thing of soy milk, you know, your choice is limited. It's like, well, this is not for me. I'll go somewhere else. But then I realized that everything I'd learned about business and product-based business, I was ignoring the guidance I would give to other people of keeping things simple and trying to scale one product to a good success, and then introducing something new. Taking one product and being the expert and especially good in it. Like, there's a reason why if you're in a band and you play music, you release an album and you have a genre and you have something, because the people who come in, they want that thing from you. And you can branch out and you can evolve over time. Look at the Beatles. But you don't literally do a different song of a different genre of everything all the time, because it's like, well, if we do an album of 12 songs and it has everything from hip hop to punk to, like, you know, Ed Sheeran style pop music, then there's something for everyone. It's like, no, you've got nothing for anyone. You please no one. So simplifying, refining that product down to the point where effectively you can make $1 million from a single product, and then go, okay, we iterated that to like near perfection. Now introduce something else. That's the guidance I would give everyone, and we haven't followed that. So that's a pivot that we're now going through, is to actually simplify our product offering and try and make that $1 million product, because we haven't yet done that, and then go from that point forward. So
it's kind of like Steve Jobs at the start of his second reign at Apple. He just came in and slashed all their product lines and focused on, you know, 2 or 3.
That's it. So, I mean, they were probably in a better place than we are now. But yeah, I'm pulling a Steve Jobs. We can call it that. So
you just need a black dog.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we'll just make no more products. So that's been the biggest learning from. I wouldn't say failure, because we haven't failed by having too many products, but we've probably limited our ability to be known for one thing by operating this long, trying to be a bit more of everything. And that means there's a lot of over ordering in stock and money sunk in. Like, we could have been more effective, we could have been leaner, and we probably could have scaled the business to bigger success by doing one thing and doing it well from day one. But like I say, I mean, every day is learning. And I've learned a lot since, and this is why, I said, I just need to start something, because I'll learn. I often say and I actually say it less now because things are building up and going in the right direction, but I'm very pragmatic, and I always said, I need to start this business because it'll probably be my third business that cracks it or does well. So the quicker I start my first one and fail, the faster I'm on my track to making all the mistakes to make the business that does well. I hope I don't have to go through 3 businesses to get there. Hopefully I can make the mistakes and they're not so costly that they, shut us down. But the whole point is fail fast is the whole thing on that.
So just a couple of questions to close up.
Yeah.
But, we mentioned books at the start of the episode, and books I think that were influential to you as an adolescent. Say, thinking back now, just in terms of what you're doing, are there any books or other resources that you would recommend to people?
Yeah, I think one of them is a book called Relentless. I think his name's Tim Gower, or I might be completely off the mark. The book's called Relentless. I actually always listen to it on Audible as well, so I don't see see the author's name. He was the physio or like the coach for Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and stuff like that for the Chicago Bulls. I've also become a massive sports fan. There was a real time between like getting into entrepreneurship and like I got way more into sport, so that's a different thing now. Because I think I just appreciate people getting rewarded for intense hard work. So this is a real tangent, but I watched this morning before I came here, because it was on last night, I watched the Brazil Grand Prix, and George Russell, the English driver, won his first Grand Prix.
Wow.
And it was amazing, like, you know, and I've followed his career, and I was so excited for him because I know that this guy has shown up time and time and time again and put in relentless amounts of effort. And to see him, like, you know, tearing up to like he won his first Grand Prix, you feel that you like, this is intense effort. And I can't imagine, I don't work as hard as a Formula One driver in anything. And to finally get that win, that's extremely motivating now. So I find a lot of like motivation in sport and stuff like that. So yeah, Relentless is a book about how Michael Jordan and players like Kobe Bryant just find their complete drive and determination and stuff. So that's a real good one to learn a bit more about yourself. And if you have what it takes to operate in that way, and if you don't have what it takes to be like, you know, a Michael Jordan in your mindset, what some of the things are you can do to adjust your mindset to be a little bit more Michael Jordan in the way that you operate, which is awesome. Really cool. So that's one that's great for mindset. What else? I think, I mean, there's a lot of books like, you know, like I said, there's a lot of Seth Godin books on marketing and things like that are great. Donald Miller, Building a Story Brand, is really good to think about branding, but they're very like, and I like that they're, you know, they're not textbooks by any means, but they're actionable strategic books. They're great, but I'd value reading something like Seneca's Letters from a Stoic, more so, like both just as valuable, but that one, that's just nice for some perspective sometimes, like, you know, to... Or
even meditations I throw in there.
Yeah, exactly. So like anything just gives you a bit of better perspective, especially when the small things get very stressful. Like I've relied heavily on stoicism in my last couple of years. So yeah, they're probably some of the things that I'd put in the reading list for now.
Cool. And in your work currently, what makes you feel alive?
Getting out from behind the computer and finding that, and this is, I really don't do it enough, and it's always on my mind, and makes me think I need to go and do something like that today. But anything that makes me feel like I'm walking up and down the street selling tickets, that's what does it. I spend 95% of my time behind the computer, and that's where I get the least effective work done. And that's something I'm really trying to work on, is because it is uncomfortable. And the thing is, as well, as I used to have my three best mates alongside me doing it. So doing it solo can sometimes feel quite different. But yeah, that feeling of like shameless hustling makes me feel like, because it's super uncomfortable. It always was. Like the first time we pulled up alongside someone with a megaphone and was like, come buy tickets to our show, was the most nerve-wracking thing. But by the 50th time, when you've had like 10 people say yes and 40 people say no, there's, you know, rejection doesn't matter. I think the more that you get rejected and the more that you convert in anything you're doing, rejection, with every single rejection, feels less painful, and to the point that you're basically numb to it. But the rush of converting and succeeding never dulls down. So it's like the more you do it, the payoff becomes way more valuable, because now, rejection is numbed, but you keep getting the rush from the success.
Yep, for sure. Last question.
Sure.
The name of this podcast is On Meaningful Work. What does the term on meaningful work mean to you?
I think it's really something that you're happy to. I mean, meaningful work can obviously come from different places, and it can often be something that provides value into the world around us, and that is something that I definitely try to do. But you can find that in most anything. If something exists, there is further meaning. Like, I found just as much meaning. I found it extremely meaningful work to go out and play like songs for people who would come and spend an hour feeling comfortable being an outcast. Like, that's really meaningful. You know, but it's also incredibly meaningful working in a not-for-profit. But it's only truly meaningful if, I think, for you will sit there doing the grinding tasks, doing the things, or getting uncomfortable and getting rejected because it's worth more to you than just like a job.
Yep.
Finally, like, you know, walking up and down and trying to do the charity sign-ups for that couple of weeks that I did it here, and that I was awful at that. Like, I was not good at getting rejected for something I didn't care. I mean, I cared about the cause, but I also felt very distant from it. It was like, I'm here signing people up on the street. Getting rejected for something that you don't find the same meaning in is very, very different to something that you believe in wholeheartedly, because it's like the rejection doesn't, it's like it glints off the armor and goes away. So I think meaningful work is something that you find where no matter how many hours you put in or how much you get knocked back, that doesn't hurt as much as it feels good to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Wow. This has been amazing, Tony. Thank you
Thanks,
so
mate.
much. And also, you know, really, thank you so much for your patience while you're screwing around with SD cards and so on. But
It's all good.
I really appreciate the time. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, thank you so much.
Excellent, mate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you're enjoying and are learning from this podcast, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. A great zero-cost way to support us is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you are feeling extra generous, it'd be great if you could leave a comment or feedback on our Apple Podcast or YouTube pages. Or you could email your comments and feedback to me directly at rahul@disruptivebusinessnetwork.com. That's RAHUL at disruptivebusinessnetwork, all one word, .com. Finally, a big shout out to our producer Dan Scahill for his work on the keys, and to Vashti Civil for writing the original music for our theme. Until next time, this is your host, Rahul Sones, signing off. Bye.